Persona is more popular now than it has ever been before, with Persona 3 Reload, the latest release, going on to become the fastest selling Atlus game ever. And while the future prospects for the series are extremely high, and as we all await with bated breath for any semblance of news, or things that could even be categorized as news, for Persona 6, I think it's important to every now and then take a little bit of a step back and analyze the series on the whole, and just ask ourselves, well, what is it about Persona that makes it so special? And what is it about this franchise that I always end up coming back to, that made me fall in love with it with Persona 5 back in the day, and has me hook, line, and sinker all these years since? So I think we should do that today. Let's take that step back and just ask ourselves, what makes Persona so special? And I think one of the major things that makes Persona so special is an aspect of gaming that has been eroded and faded out of the spotlight in recent years to be sacrificed on the altar of monetization. And that is the aesthetics, the cosmetics, and the overall visual and aesthetic cohesion that each of these games have at their disposal. Persona 3, 4, and 5 all have a unique feel, charm, and style to them. Persona 3 still feels like a Persona game, but it is unmistakably Persona 3. Same thing with 4, same thing with 5, and they achieve this with every aspect of the game's experience. Now, I don't think this is the only pillar of what makes Persona so special, but I definitely think it's one of the major ones. In fact, it's one of the things that drew me into P5 all those years ago, and what made P5 so special and stand out so much to me against an veritable onslaught of other games, is that no matter where you look, no matter what you hear, or whatever you do, the game reminds you that you're playing Persona 5. Everything from the UI to the sound design to the characters, the dialogue, the story, the gameplay, it all oozes that semblance, that essence of Persona. And the same thing can be said with Persona 4 to a different degree, but also Persona 3 and now Persona 3 Reload, where even when it comes to Persona 3, each of the main entries has its overall feel and style to it. Fez feels like Fez, Portable feels and looks like Portable, while Reload has its own unique style while still feeling and emanating that Persona 3 goodness. Each game has a color aesthetic and a color scheme that it really leans into, but it tries to make sure that the entire UI and game experience on the whole reflects this core principle, this core overarching visual and just overall aesthetic that the game tries to remind and hammer into you every moment of the game. Persona 3 is all about death. Understanding death, memento mori, coming to terms with it, and accepting it, and choosing to live your life to the fullest with whatever time you have left in this life. So, what does Reload do? Well, the entire aesthetic and theme of the game is that it's underwater, with the UI, and all of that. And it's brilliant, because every time you open up the options menu, you are reminded that, in essence, that options menu is symbolizing Makoto drowning. And the game starts with a simple message. You have 1 year left. Live it to your fullest. So the game is big, bombastic, and colorful, fun and varied, with many different things to do and a whole bunch of colorful characters to meet and grow alongside with. You are fire burning brightly before it eventually fades away and blinks out of existence. That is the theme, the message of Persona 3. Memento mori. Death is not something to be feared, but accepted, and to live your life to the fullest accordingly. It is a theme and a message that is intrinsic to the Persona 3 experience. It gives that game its own identity, whereas the gameplay loop and utilization of music gives it the feeling of being a Persona game. However, each of the other Persona games, and I'm namely talking about 3, 4, and 5 here, as those are what I consider to be modern Persona games, with the social link dynamic, as well as the dungeon crawling aspects. 4 relies on, well, learning to accept yourself for who you are, faults and all. Not running from who you are, but accepting yourself, and wanting to get better, and to do better. In order to do that, you have to understand who you are, and accept who you are, and to love yourself first and foremost, before you can work on bettering yourself. You can't run away from the past, you can't run away from who you are. But those little insecurities, whether they're big or small, don't represent all of who we are. And it packages this theme up, the whole bunch of colorful characters, alongside a murder mystery, all culminating with the idea that now that you've accepted yourselves, What will you do with it? Will you choose to move into the future? Persona 5 is a societal critique of the Japanese culture and lifestyle. Well, maybe lifestyle is not the word to use, more like it's a cultural breakdown and critique of society. Namely Japan society, though a lot of these lessons can be carried over to wherever you are, most likely than not. However, that's one aspect of Persona 5. The other aspect is all about how our desires can drive us and fuel us for better or for worse, and how to understand what our desires are, and to how to utilize our desires in a more healthy way, in a selfless way, while also understanding and recognizing that the past is the past. And to achieve true happiness, we have to be willing to walk into the future. Well, J-Moles, why did you go into all of that? Well, it's kind of important to Persona. You see, they try and interweave these aspects and these concepts into multiple different avenues. Whether it's through the tone, the feeling of it, the visual design, or even the gameplay. Think about Persona 3 with Tartarus. A long, seemingly endless, winding tower labyrinthine experience where you go through multiple different challenges and possibly heartache, but over time you hone yourself and get better and stronger until eventually, at a seemingly moment's notice, the end approaches, and you reach the end of Tartarus. Kind of a metaphor for life, since you knew the entire time there was an endpoint to Tartarus, you just didn't know when it was. It's kind of like death, isn't it? Memento Mori. You knew there was an endpoint to this place, but you had to make use of what you had access to. Persona 4 is all about accepting yourself, so what do they do for the dungeon design in that game? Well, each dungeon is fashioned after one of the new main party members, or one key significant character, and it's all about that character listening to the voice in their head, confronting themselves and accepting them for who they are, supposed faults and all, or insecurities and all. And if they have a question about themselves that they don't understand, they have to, at the end, find an answer to it. And learn to understand that their shadow, the things that we have been fighting, and the signature boss for each of these dungeons, is not so different from them. May not be the whole book, but it is a chapter. What about Persona 5? Well, each palace, as the dungeons are called in that game, are representations of that specific character's overarching desire. Whether it's a bank for greed, a tomb to represent their desire for death, that's a big oversimplification, by the way, a castle to represent control, filled with lust, a space station to represent corporate greed and the CEO's desire for ever greater prospects. Persona doesn't treat any of the main pillars of gaming, whether it's the music, the aesthetics, the visuals, the gameplay design, level design, or whatever, as singular one-off entities that don't have to combine with one another. They utilize each of these core aspects with one another to make a whole greater than the sum of its parts. They don't try and devalue any one specific pillar, they utilize each to form a feel and an aesthetic to carry the game and to give the game a sense of identity and purpose going into the future. All the while still feeling like Persona, but giving each game its own separate, unique, secular identity. And whereas a lot of games out there, and especially a lot of modern games, treat cosmetics and the aesthetics as kind of something to be sacrificed on the pillar of monetization, and to include a whole bunch of things that separate themselves from the established aesthetic to ruin that overall immersion, Persona leads into it. Sure, they may offer you a bunch of different costumes, but chances are those costumes, well, work in the context of Persona, and they don't completely detract from the actual aesthetic of the game or the feel of it. Just something fun and silly that you can have at your disposal if that is your prerogative. And this is important because Persona nails a lot of key elements that a lot of people care about. If you care a lot about the gameplay loop of a game like I do, then Persona offers one of the best versions of turn-based combat I have ever seen. It's fun and enjoyable, and it's to me a perfect evolution of the Pokemon style that I grew up with having different elements, strengths and weaknesses and resistances. Persona nails that idea and that fundamental principle that I so much enjoyed growing up all those years ago with Pokemon, but offers a fresh new twist on it that is, in my opinion, more enjoyable to me. And no matter how much or how often I play Persona, I always find that combat loop to be enjoyable and fun. And I think Persona on the whole has really good boss design, which is one of my biggest critiques with a lot of turn-based games. I generally don't enjoy boss design in turn-based games. But in Persona, I do, and I can even look forward to a boss just to see what cool idea they came up with. Because the bosses aren't just meant to be gameplay experiences, they also lean into the story, but they are fun by themselves. They have personality, feel, character. The game doesn't treat story or gameplay or visuals or aesthetic or audio design as separate from one another, they lean into one another. So you may love a boss fight because of the music going on. Rivers in the Desert, for instance. Yeah? Banger song. But you can also like that fight because of how enjoyable it is gameplay-wise. Or because of how cool that entire feel is, or because of what that fight symbolizes and represents for the story on the whole. The four main pillars of a game that I tend to find people enjoy one or the other more often than not compared to other people. Generally speaking, if you enjoy a game, you may care more about the looks, the sound design, the gameplay loop, or the story. And that's fine. But with Persona, it feels like they make a valiant effort and a consistently high quality enough of an effort to nail each of those aspects every time, or at least more often than not. And that stuff matters, because if you're like me and you enjoy a mix of those concepts, when they nail at such a high level time and time again, a great blend of those concepts, it elevates those fights, makes them more memorable and more endearing. And this isn't just limited to boss fights. This can go to any aspect of the game. Just think about the social simulator aspects. You may enjoy the schedule keeping. You may enjoy just listening to the music or vibing around the city, to the visuals. Or you may care about the actual stories of the social links going on. Or you may care about, hey, I want to prioritize this long-term schedule to maximize my social links and my social stat game. If you only care about one of those aspects, chances are you may really enjoy that aspect of the game because they make a valiant effort and a good enough of an effort to make sure that pillar is fun and enjoyable by itself. But if you're like me again, and you like some combination of all of these ideas and aspects, they nail all of them and it draws you in even further. And that's the thing with Persona on the whole. It won't be for everyone, but because of the nature of how much they put into each of these core principles and pillars time and time again throughout the entirety of the game, chances are you may find something that you enjoy in nearly every aspect of the game. And do they nail it all the time? No. It's not like Persona is a perfect franchise. Nothing is. But I tend to find more often than not, they get it right more than they get it wrong. Persona doesn't try to be serious all the time. It doesn't try to be a comedy festival all the time. It goes from one extreme to the other and knows when it needs to be somewhere in the middle. It gives the world life due to the aesthetics, the visuals, and the audio design, while also populating that world with brilliant standout cast of characters time and time again, all alongside a brilliant gameplay loop that is fun, enjoyable, and replayable, and a bunch of great progression and management. And each game also tends to have its own unique flavor and take and twist on the formula, and may prioritize certain aspects more than others. For instance, I really enjoy Persona 5's, and specifically Royal's idea that for each of the social links, you're going to gain some kind of passive buff for some aspect of the game consistently, or at least rather consistently, throughout the social link / confidant. I like that idea, so I have a penchant for Persona 5. But it doesn't mean that I dislike P3 or P4, it just may mean that I gravitate to a game for a specific reason compared to the others. For instance, I also adore the cast of characters in P4 because of how they're written, how that game specifically tackles character development and execution, which is a style and a formula that I really find personally interesting. But I can't say someone else who prefers P3 or P4's characters are wrong because it's a different flavor. It still feels like Persona, it's just a slightly different twist on it, and that's fine. We can talk, we can debate, we can discuss, but at the end of the day, there's a reason that seemingly each of these main Persona games, and this can even be established for P1 and P2, there's a reason each of these games have such a fan base and the fan bases that they do. Because these games aren't afraid to have their own unique identity to them, but they aren't afraid to also feel like Persona on the whole. And that's one of the beautiful things about Persona, in my opinion. And one of the most beautiful things about a lot of these, big franchises, is when they're able to feel like they belong in the franchise while also having identity to their own individual selves. And because Persona takes the time to develop and flesh out each of these individual pillars while also having multiple of these pillars interweave with one another, in different combinations at different times, it works and establishes a visual and a sense of immersion, if you will, that pulls you in. Or at least it did for me, and it continues to do so. And with that, I think I'll call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure for making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. And hit the bell icon to be notified when I upload and stream in the future. And leave a comment down below with what your favorite Persona game is, and what is it about that game specifically that drew you in so much and made you love it so much. I'd love to hear your thoughts, hear your opinions, to hear your perspectives, and to hear your stories. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all next time.